In France, more and more people are heading to the far right. There's growing support for right-wing populism with a particularly tough stance on immigration.
L'immigration.
So, who are these politicians? Who's backing them? And should Europe be bracing itself for change? Here's what you need to know. This is Hénin-Beaumont in northern France, a place where far-right politicians have always tended to do well, going back to the National Front and now its successor party, the Rassemblement National, the National Rally. But before we delve into where those supporters are coming from, let's look at one family, one dynasty almost, whose DNA is threaded through far-right politics in France. Jean-Marie Le Pen, founder of the Front National, a party that opposed immigration but embraced his definition of French nationalism. It was also co-founded by Pierre Bousquet, a member of the French division of the Waffen-SS, the notorious military wing of the Nazi Party. What started in the political margins has become more and more popular. Jean-Marie Le Pen was a paratrooper in the Algerian War, more on that soon. He has got a very controversial history, indicted on racism or racial hatred charges at least 6 times, including for comments about the Holocaust and France's Muslim communty.
Les chambres à gaz, c'est un détail de l'histoire de la guerre mondiale.
During the 1950s, while leading a special military intelligence unit, Le Pen appeared to admit ordering the torture of Algerian detainees. He later recanted those statements, and he's won defamation cases against those who've accused him of torture. But over the years, the accusations had accumulated and the violent history had stuck. And that's why we need to talk about the French war in Algeria. You'll hear this term about French people who returned to mainland France after that war. They were pieds noirs, or Blackfeet, people who settled in Algeria during France's colonial occupation. They had rights that the Algerians didn't. Now, many of them supported France in the independence war that followed, one in which torture was used by France and civilians on both sides were attacked. De Gaulle called a referendum in January 1961 in which 75% of the French in France voted for Algeria's self-determination, but not everyone agreed. And this is where Jean-Marie Le Pen comes back in. Having served in Algeria, he entered politics and co-founded the National Front. In 1962, Algeria gained its liberation after 132 years of French occupation. More than 1 million settlers returned from Algeria to France, fearing reprisals from the indigenous population. Though French, many had lived in the former colony for generations and had never even been to France, but they still feel the shock of their forced departure. The Pieds Noirs and their descendants often voted for far-right candidates.
It's not only a protest vote, it's really an ideological vote. In the sense, it's a sense of feeling of insecurity, which is very present in France. The Pieds Noirs, having got kicked out of Algeria, a land which, by the way, some Pieds Noirs, not all of them were colonialists who had been there only for 50 years. Some had been there for much, much longer, and including since the Roman Empire. These people getting kicked out of Algeria and seeing people coming from these places that had kicked them out arrive starting in the 1970s, that has fed a sentiment of cultural insecurity that has only grown with time.
It would go with whoever promises them reparations. And it's only really in the 1990s that the Pieds Noirs as a community now, as a kind of an older community of mainly older people based mainly on historical resentment, actually really shift heavily to the National Front. Of course, they do this because their historical grievances align very well with Le Pen's sort of historical grievance politics.
Jean-Marie Le Pen was a disruptor though. He ran for president 5 times and even got to the runoff in 2002. where he suffered a huge landslide defeat at the hands of Jacques Chirac. Now for the next part of the Le Pen dynasty, his daughter, Marine. She took over the FN and then in 2015 began a series of reforms to detoxify the party. Marine Le Pen expelled her father, changed the name of the Front National to the less confrontational the National Rally, and tempered her own language.
Et je vais vous dire, au fond, Jean-Marie Le Pen devrait faire preuve de sagesse. Il devrait tirer les conséquences du trouble qu'il a lui-même créé et peut-être arrêter ses responsabilités politiques.
And she, what we call in French, de-demonized it. That is to say, she normalized it.
More recently, she and her party members joined a protest march against anti-Semitism in Paris, following a spike in hate crimes in France following the Hamas-led attacks on the 7th of October 2023 and the Israeli invasion of the Gaza Strip.
She did purge the party from overtly anti-Semitic, overtly xenophobic members. She started to speak a language that sounded rather reasonable for a far-right party. She mixed a lot of what we would call left-leaning values and indeed Republican values of the left, like secularism, like the welfare state. It operates within the Republican family, that it's now a Republican Party and not the far-right shadow of her father.
So who is voting for Marine Le Pen's party? In both 2018 and 2022, she lost the presidential runoff against Emmanuel Macron. But the important thing is, between those two elections, the gap narrowed. Le Pen was becoming more popular and more acceptable. Her party won more than 31% in the 2024 European elections. That was more than the combined share of Emmanuel Macron's Renaissance Party and the Socialist Party's coalition. Sky News data analysed voting patterns in 96 French departments. Those are a bit like counties in the UK. And what we discovered was that there was a link between those voting for the far right and areas with lower incomes, like N, in the northeast of this country. An area where incomes are lower than the national average, where the cost of living crisis has really hit home. And almost 60% of N residents voted for the far right. In Marine Le Pen's own constituency, in Pas-de-Calais, in the northwest, with a similar economic profile, more than half the voters backed her RN party. But it's a different story among more affluent metropolitan voters. In Paris, the far right's share of the vote was just 15%. And we can see a similar trend in areas with high unemployment. In southern France, on the border with Spain, the unemployment rate stands at 12.4% in the Pyrénées-Orientales. There, the far right captured over 50% of the votes.
Any place like in Beaumont that actually used to be a lot more of a left-wing stronghold, a very kind of long process actually set into motion in the 1990s at a time of, you could say, political abandonment. Beaumont also in the southwest over the last few years is a complete sort of transition of even culture. So kind of a new culture of defining oneself from before we, the workers, to we, the French. And it has many reasons, of course, one of which is stagnation, one of it is fear. Rassemblement National also offers this very easy, you can say, discourse that faulted everything onto immigration.
Her critics accuse Le Pen of simply spinning old ideas with new language, and they question whether she does have a strategy to address the concerns of French voters.
She has managed to aggregate the sentiments, the aspirations, the fears as well, of whole parts, whole sections of French society that, to be honest, the old elites had not listened to, or had stopped listening to, or were not defending or were not championing in their political discourse.
What's really interesting is the share of young people who are voting for the Rassemblement National. In the 2022 presidential election, just under 50% of 25 to 34-year-olds who cast a vote opted for Le Pen, compared to just 41% of the general population, and a mere 29% of voters aged over 70. So what's happening here? Why are so many of France's Gen Z and younger millennials voting for the far right?
About the cost of living, because it's a very, very important subject, and also live in security in their country. It's also very important for them. For these two subjects, I think that many people think that Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella are the best personality to change their life.
We can't vote for them. It's not for the. It's not politics, you know. It's about the past. The Algerian war, the Jean-Marie Le Pen, Marine Le Pen are not. They are not make politics. They are make racism.
Video edits of the young president of the party, Jordan Bardella, often go viral on TikTok. Now, Bardella has extensive roots in the Italian city of Turin. He says he's 75% Italian. He grew up on the crime-riddled streets in the suburbs northeast of Paris, but he went to a private school. Now, Bardella dropped out of Sorbonne University when he was just 17 in order to join the Rassemblement National, saying that he was inspired by Marine Le Pen. He worked his way up through the party, and Le Pen gave him his nickname, the Lion Cub. Bardella eclipsed Le Pen's niece, Marion Maréchal, long seen as the eventual family successor, who then quit the party altogether to back far-right rival presidential candidate Éric Zemmour. In 2022, Le Pen made Bardella president of RN. His meteoric rise solidified when he became the EU's second youngest MEP ever that same year. The TikTok politician regularly posts videos of himself speaking to his 1.7 million strong following.
Bonsoir à tous. Je vous fais cette petite vidéo.
Helping him connect with voters. But does he offer more style than substance?
He is not even 30. He understands social media. Clean face is a very sort of smooth appearance that would be able to follow party line. Was also recruited as the face of the party as a way of finding someone you can control relatively easily. If you look at any internal disagreements between Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella doesn't really ever try to fight back. But this doesn't mean that it will not change.
One of Bardella's catchphrases is "France is disappearing." It plays into the RN's key policies, defined by a sort of France first mentality. It means French citizens should be given priority over non-French nationals for jobs, welfare, housing, a doctrine Marine Le Pen has continued from her father. And with voters fed up with Macron's rule, it is striking a chord.
The insecurity is much more economic and cultural, but cultural in the sense of this international culture is kind of breaking all of the social fabric around them, and this is what is leading to this cultural insecurity.
So where does this all leave us? Well, all over the world, right-wing populism has been on the rise, but particularly in America and Europe, driven by immigration, social media campaigns, anger over perceived government overreach, but also in places like this, a former coal mining region, a sense that voters have been forgotten, left behind by globalization. And France's particular history feeds into that sense of disenchantment. In 2027, this country will hold a presidential election, and there are many who think that could be the catalyst for seismic change. The radical right, for so long in the margins, is now mainstream.